We are trying to get everyone to take control of the piece of the earth that they own, which is their yard, and say, okay, you can use your yard to help the pollinator population. You really, are we going to be able to stop our neighbors from using different chemicals, and pesticides? Probably not. Are we going to be able to stop monoculture ag? Probably not. Neonicotinoids? Probably not. But we do control our yard. And therefore, what is the best way to use that little slice of the earth that we own? It is to plant native plants.
Let's discover what people are building in the greater Cleveland community. We are telling the stories of Northeast Ohio's entrepreneurs, builders, and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the real pleasure of speaking with David Levine, who has made a career of invention and serial entrepreneurship. In 2005, David co-founded Wireless Environment to revolutionize the lighting industry with a belief that off-grid wireless LED lighting would be the future of lighting. And over the next 13 years, David proved out that exact thesis, as he led the organization as CEO to over $30 million in sales on just $1.1 million in equity raised, and ultimately to acquisition by Ring in 2017, and subsequently to Amazon in 2018. And there are some truly incredible stories that David shares about this entire experience building, growing, and exiting Wireless Environment. Post-acquisition, with the time now to reflect and to focus on what challenge to tackle next, and to think through what he ultimately wants to provide to the world, David shifted his focus to natural habitat restoration and his longtime fascination with bees, whose populations are waning and whose endangerment is highly consequential to our food supply and planet at large. In the spirit of this problem, David joined forces with his co-founder, Wyatt Shell, to start My Home Park in 2021 to revolutionize how people view their yards and empower them to use their yards to restore the environment. My Home Park is a platform that creates curated gardens delivered right to customers' doorsteps, taking the guesswork, the effort, and the frustration out of landscaping with native plants. For those who want to do something beneficial for the environment, planting native plant gardens is the highest order impact you can have on the environment per dollar spent. Knowing that in just 100 square feet, native plants feed up to 2,000 pollinators per day, conserve 2,300 gallons of water per year, and provide 16 times greater soil stabilization. And My Home Park facilitates this entire process. David is an inspiring entrepreneur, and this conversation is packed full of wisdom. So with that, please enjoy my conversation with David Levine after a brief message from our sponsor. Lay of the Land is brought to you by Impact Architects and by 90. As we share the stories of entrepreneurs building incredible organizations in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio, Impact Architects has helped hundreds of those leaders, many of whom we have heard from as guests on this very podcast, realize their own visions and build these great organizations. I believe in Impact Architects and the people behind it so much that I have actually joined them personally in their mission to help leaders gain focus, align together, and thrive by doing what they love. If you too are trying to build great, Impact Architects is offering to sit down with you for a free consultation or provide a free trial through 90, the software platform that helps teams build great companies. If you are interested in learning more about partnering with Impact Architects or by leveraging 90 to power your own business, please go to ia.layoftheland.fm. The link will also be in our show notes. I was thinking about where the best place to start would be, and knowing that My Home Park is the third venture that you have embarked on. I personally am fascinated by serial entrepreneurship and the mindset of those who've opted to re-embark on the most difficult journey to build something formidable and valuable from scratch. And so I'd love to, understand where your entrepreneurial drive stems from. Was it something innately that you always had this enterprising spirit, or is it something you developed over time? How is it that you came to want to do this?
I think my enterprising spirit definitely came from my dad. He was a person who was marginally hireable, I say. So that's what makes him a good entrepreneur. He was a pharmacist with a entrepreneur's mind, and he had something really bad happen to him when he was, and when I say really bad, business wise, really bad, when he was, I'd say he was in his mid 30s, and he had become a partner with his father in a drugstore in Massapequa Park, New York, which is on Long Island. And my grandfather retired, his dad retired, so he brought on a new partner, someone he knew, and they didn't get along. So they went to a lawyer's office and they flipped a coin to see who got to buy who out of the store. And the store was named after the family, Levine's Park Pharmacy in Massapequa Park. And he lost. So he got some money out of it, but he then had to find a job, and he started working as a pharmacist at a supermarket when supermarkets first had drugstores in them. And he was miserable. He couldn't work for anybody. And on the weekends, we would travel all over the Northeast looking for a store to buy. The crazy story is that he was going to stay behind during spring break. And my family, my mom took the 3 kids to Disney World. This is 1978, say. So he was driving us to the airport. He told his employer he was going with us, but he was going to stay behind and look for a store. On the way to the airport, we got a flat tire on the way to JFK Airport. So scrambled, hailed a cab, got to the airport at the very last minute. And because we were late, we got all split up. And my mom was sitting next to someone on the plane, and they started talking. He's like, oh, my Uncle Lou has 2 drugstores in Western Massachusetts he's selling. And we landed. My mom called my dad, and he wound up buying the store. And it was a small store in a small New England town, but it was the center of the town. There were no chains there. And it was great for me, starting when I was 11 years old, just doing every job in that store, understanding the importance of customer service, understanding the need for innovation. While I was there, he had the town's first video rental store, for instance. He was always thinking like that. And then he started putting video rental stores in different forts throughout and marine bases. I watched his mind, and I said, that's what I think is exciting about business, is coming up with these ideas. And then the next most influential thing that happened to me, Jeffrey, was at college. I started a magazine with a friend who's still one of my best friends to this day. And that process of hiring people, selling ads, doing layout, all the content, the business side, managing a team, inspiring a team, that was the next most influential part of my entrepreneurial journey.
So I'll say the focus of which problems you've chosen to spend time working on solving is quite large. It covers a lot of different things. Is that just a consequence of you being curious in a lot of, like, when we're talking about the breadth of problems, from magazines to lighting to lawns and the environment, which we'll get to, is there a thread that ties these together? How is it that you've become interested in the problems that you're trying to solve?
It's a good question that I haven't thought about, but it's finding white space has become like something I'm just innately capable of doing. And depending on how agitated I am by the problem, depends on how much energy I have to solve it. So right now, and we'll get into it, we're trying to save bees and other pollinators. That is a big driving force. I don't want my kids to run out of food. But the lighting was because my grandmother had tripped on the way to the bathroom because she didn't want to turn on a light and disturb her sleep. That was pretty agitating to me. And before that, power tools, that was more of an opportunity that I found interesting in my first foray into starting my own company.
So did you have a vision immediately stem from that incident with the trip and fall as it related to wireless environment and Mr. Beams? Or how is it that you approach this identification of white space and creating an idea and a vision for the future and a corresponding business.
Yeah, that was interesting because you had night lights, right? Why do you need a product when you have night lights? The issue with night lights were twofold. One, they're on all night or they're not, right? You either leave them on and they disturb your sleep or you don't. And number two is you can't put them anywhere you don't have an outlet. So, my partner Mike Recker and I just started thinking about that. Well, what if you could just slap it anywhere and it only turned on when it detected motion? That to us seemed like a big enough idea. And then when we started extrapolating it, well, closets, that was another big issue for us. We both had closets with no lights. You would live in an old house, and I'm sure, to wire a closet in your house would be a disaster. So we came up with a $20 closet light that works like, the what you have in a hotel. When you open the door, the light goes on, and then when you close it, it eventually goes off. That one felt like, okay, there's both safety issues, there's utility issues, and it felt like a really good space at the time.
Did you have a sense at the point where you began to actually build the product of what it would become, fast forwarding to an acquisition to Ring and subsequently to Amazon? Was that, part of the vision at all, or was it really just, one step in front of the other?
It was, somewhat desperation. My first venture had failed, and I needed to do something else, and I realized I was not going to be a good fit for someone else's company. But I didn't think big enough at that time. I was more in survival mode. I just wanted to create some products that people responded well to and that had an impact on them. It wasn't till later till I started adding some bigger thinkers. Part of it was Jumpstart, part of it was some of my board members that they started saying, start with the exit in mind and then work your way backwards. And mostly from some conversations with people at Jumpstart, and Jumpstart was one of our investors. It was, well, if you looked at yourself as a technology play instead of a hardware play, Jeffrey, like that, what does that look like? What does a hardware play? And we heard that from them right after they rejected us. Jumpstart rejected us for the first time. And Mike and I went over to the Barking Spider. Have you ever been there? It's on Case Western. It used to be. Great little spot.
I haven't been, actually.
It's like it's an old stable, I think, that was a bar at the time. And we're sitting outside having a beer, kind of, feeling sorry for ourselves. And Mike looked up at this, this old, very old brick barn and said, what if you needed to put a light on a building like this and you needed to control it, but it's just too expensive to wire? What would you do? And that just was like this moment where we started thinking about, okay, if LED lights get more and more efficient and they can be more applications can be run off of battery power and wireless communication gets better, how many applications could a wireless light cover? And that moment was essential for us in thinking bigger and eventually building a whole patent portfolio, building a fence around this idea of wireless lighting. And that's what got Jamie Simonoff, the founder of Ring, so interested in us.
So one of the things that I've been very interested to get your perspective on, particularly I think in the context of the somewhat inflated, market and valuations that we've seen over the last few years, and companies, I think, prioritizing growth at all expense, relative to viable business economics, was that, you were able to grow this business from zero to $30+ million in revenue off of a considerable amount of equity, but orders of magnitude smaller than I think what we're seeing today in a bootstrapped capacity.
Right. It was, 1.1 million is the amount of equity we raised. We did have some loans as well.
What is your philosophy around bootstrapping and the importance of it and the strategies that allowed for you to be successful in growing the business?
Bootstrapping was essential for two reasons. One, it allowed us to maintain control and decision making. And Mike and I, when we started the company, we made a pact, like no matter what we do, you and I have to maintain the decision making. So many times, and I worked for two big companies. First Dow Chemical for 4 years, and then Black and Decker DeWalt for 4 years. Loved it, great experience, but I always felt like I could make better decisions than the people who were making decisions. So that was like our mantra is just whatever it is, we have to maintain decision making control. And the other side is, like, we realized early on that if you have money, you're going to waste it. That there was no better way to grow a company in our situation than to set a milestone, raise enough money to hit that milestone, put our heads down, reach the milestone, pick our heads up, say, oh, we now have a product to sell. Let's raise a little bit more money at a slightly higher valuation. Then, go out, start selling the product, get some sales results, pick our heads up again. Okay, we think we can do this again. We were raising chunks of about $300,000 at a time. It kept us super focused. We did not waste money. We did not even consider anything that wouldn't pay off directly. Now, again, smaller vision than most people. Compare us to Ring. And when Jamie Siminoff started Ring, I believe he raised off the bat about $300 million and built this company very rapidly. I couldn't believe when I saw their numbers how many $250 video doorbells they were selling, especially since a regular doorbell costs about $8.99 at Home Depot. But people were paying it, but they grew super fast. That was their goal. But he put himself in some risky situations. There were a lot of mistakes. The company wasn't profitable. So we were just a different method, I mean, it's like the West Coast style versus what I see as more of a Midwest style. But we did not waste money. Wasting money also is a waste of time. When you have the money, you're going to go in a wrong direction many times. So it was essential for us, and we still operate that way. We sweat right now over $300 expenses that we're considering. So I just feel like for me, I'd rather do it a little slower and maintain control and maintain and maintain our focus than go off with some big number. I would be scared if I all of a sudden saw like $1 million in my bank account. I think I'd go, I'd go crazy, Jeffrey. I'd be dangerous.
Well, there's something that resonates, which is that constraint is somewhat requisite to the innovative process, right? Without constraints, it's hard to know how to focus.
I agree. And look, I've been able to witness a lot of startups, and there are areas I see where I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like customizing a software package, right? Like spending $200,000 to customize a software package so it works better for you. These are some of the signs when I see, I'm thinking, okay, I'm not betting on this company. It should be, innovation and maybe patenting, but patenting is a terrible situation for most companies. And it was for us until we figured it out, and sales. And not business development. I can't stand that term business development. It's sales. It's going out and selling, right? That's why, that's where the money should be spent. Innovation and the product market fit, and then going out and selling it, but not marketing it as much, right? There's a big difference.
Yeah, it's a euphemism, business development.
I agree.
Well, kind of keeping us progressing through the evolution of wireless environment and Mr. Beams, you find a home with Ring and subsequently a home with Amazon.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of walk us through both those, acquisition processes and what that was like?
As I mentioned, so wireless environment was a 12-year overnight success. We had steady growth from zero to, as you said, over $30 million in the wireless lights under the Mr. Beams brand. along the way, we built up a really interesting patent portfolio. And, after 12 years, Mike and I were looking at each other and saying, okay, it's probably time to start thinking about an exit. Weren't sure how to do it. We had kind of talked to M&A people over the years, and they give us an estimate of what they thought we might be worth. And it never seemed it never seemed like high enough to make us want to spend a lot of time there. So my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, lives out in Malibu, and he does CrossFit out there. And he calls me one day and says, one of my friends in CrossFit helped start Ring Doorbell. Are you interested in talking to them? And we had been on Home Shopping Network right around the time. It was like, I would go on there and sell some lights, and Ring was on there, and I couldn't believe how many they were selling. And I had been hearing stories about how sales were. So I said, of course. So we connected. They connected me to Jamie Siminoff, who a lot of people know from Shark Tank. He was a founder of Ring, brilliant entrepreneur, really, really good product person, really big thinker. And we just talked on the phone, and Jamie said, Shaq is one of our guys. The Cavs were hosting playoffs at that point. He flew in. We had a good meeting, and it went pretty fast from there. And I had never done this before, so I hired a friend who was in my study group at business school, who's out in the Valley and does a lot of software deals. And I said to him, "Can you recommend someone who could help us represent us for this deal?" And he said, "I want to do it. I'm gonna help you with this, and we're gonna get this done." He had helped Macromedia sell to Adobe. He had been on some big deals, and he had sold a lot of smaller companies, so he had good experience. So at one point, we laugh about this. He said to me, Ring gave us an offer, and I was like, "This is a pretty good offer." He said to me, no, you can't just take this offer. You have to shop the deal around. And I said, "Brian, if Jamie finds out that we're shopping this deal around, he's gonna flip." He's a very emotional guy. He's a very reactive guy. So he said, "Don't worry, they're not going to know. Here's how you do it." So he tells me, go on LinkedIn and look at all the competitors and try to get to the CEOs and tell them that you have an offer from a company and that you think that they'd be good, they'd be a good acquirer for us. And so these were companies like, Netlink and the home networking company. And there were a bunch of companies. I reached out to them, and two of them responded to me. And so I think Comcast was one of them. Said, "Yeah, let's talk a little bit more." We had a couple of conversations. So this is all happening over the course of like a Friday. One of them says to me, "Come out on Monday and let's talk." So one other piece of this is, after Brian convinced me this was the right thing to do, I went home and told my wife, and we had been in Nantucket visiting Jamie and his wife, had a nice time. And I told her what we were doing, and she said, "You're crazy. If Jamie finds out, this is going to crater the deal." And I said to her, "I'm caught between what Brian's saying and you're saying." So I get Brian on the phone, and in this conversation, it got a little heated. And he said to my wife, "Lisa, how many $200 million deals have you closed?" And I was like, whoa, this is getting pretty serious. So we went ahead, and I set up this meeting for the Monday with this company on the West Coast. And Saturday night, Lisa and I are at a nice Indians game. It's a warm night. They're playing the Yankees. I'm enjoying myself, and the phone rings. It's Jamie. And Jamie, I said, "Hey, Jamie." I ran up so I could hear him. I ran up from the stand, and he is screaming at me, "How dare you use me as a stalking horse? What are you doing? What do you think you're doing? This deal is off." Yelled at me for about 5 minutes, told me the deal was off, and that was it. So you can imagine me going back to my seat with my wife, Lisa, and explaining to her what just happened after, she had told me, like, we shouldn't be doing this. Anyhow, the next day, Jamie called me back and raised the offer and said, "Let's just get this done." So, deals have a way of blowing up multiple times. This one absolutely did. I'm still kind of amazed that it worked out that way and Brian was right. But it really still feels like it could have blown up easily. It could have blown up easily. So we got the deal done. We used someone recommended we use Jones Day, which was like an amazing experience for me. Those guys are just pros at getting this deal done. And we got the deal done November 1st, 2017. 2 days later, Ring, who had bought this alarm business that was working with ADT, 2 days later, Ring was told by a federal court to remove its alarm product from the shelves because they had violated the intellectual property or property, let's just say, and assets of ADT by buying this company that ADT had funded. And Jamie called me that day. So, this was 2 days after. It was like 36 hours after our deal closed. And he said to me, he told me what happened. He said, don't worry about it. We got it. But if this had happened before we closed your deal, we wouldn't have closed your deal. We wouldn't have been able to do it. So the timing was really quite crazy. And then, so Jamie came back in January and we went to another Cavs game with his family. And we're waiting in line at whatever the B spot is where the Cavs play. And he said to me, we're getting bought by Amazon. We're just waiting in line. He says, casually said, we're getting bought by Amazon. And I just was incredulous. And I guess the most interesting thing for me was we had a small team. We were about 23 people at Wireless running this $30 million business. Most everyone had grown up in Ohio, never left the state of Ohio. It wasn't like a well-traveled and experienced team. So I had to first break the news to them, right around November 1st, we're getting bought by Ring and, Santa Monica, California, and what that could mean. Then 3 months later, breaking the news, by the way, we're now working for Amazon, Seattle, Washington. It was interesting. I think they were better prepared the second time because of that. But, that was quite, to go from 23 people to one of the biggest, fastest growing companies in that short a period of time was everyone's head was spinning.
Wow. What a story. I want to understand from a place where you are now running the smart lighting business for one of the largest companies in the world, what becomes the mental, calculus for deciding to get back into the arena, right? Because that's ultimately what you've decided to do and what you're now working on at My Home Park. What was the process of, finding that white space and honing in on a new problem from there?
The first thing was, what's the right timing to leave? And I had two thoughts or two factors for this, Jeffrey. So number one was we had a 3-year earnout. I had to stay 3 years in order for our friends and family investors to get paid out fully. So I knew I had to get kind of comfortable in the situation because 3 years at the time seemed very long, and it actually was very long. Or working for a big company all of a sudden. And the second thing was I want to make sure all our employees are taken care of. That I knew would take some time, just figuring out the system, getting integrated into Ring first, and then Amazon, and then making sure everyone had opportunities that were beyond our little office, here in Mayfield Village, Ohio. So both of those kept me busy, and they were rewarding in the sense that I felt like I was doing something for somebody. On a side note, of the 23, 24 people we had, 19 are still there. So this is 5.5 years later, are still there working for Amazon, moving up. Amazon levels you L4, L5, L6. They've moved up. Some are L7s and making so much more. My friend who I had coffee with this week was a communications major out of Ohio State and didn't really know what she wanted to do. We hired her because she was a bank teller at one point and she had experience, obviously counting money. So we put her in charge of shipping. And now she's making crazy salary. As she told me, I was just like, you're like probably making more than, than most of the people who graduated from Ohio State Business School now. And that is really rewarding. So that was one of the reasons why I was, able to stay. But I kind of had to, so we could all get paid out. And I started thinking about, okay, what's the next widget? I kept coming up with new, widgets. At this point, I had a history with lighting, battery-powered products, electronics, communication, wireless communication, smart home. There's a lot, right? There's a lot of more agitations to solve. It hit me like this bee thing is starting to get out of control. That the bee population is dying. People aren't really sure why. There aren't a lot of people putting, entrepreneurial solutions towards it. And I had this vision of building a better bee house, right? You have bird houses, and then I saw that bees can live in houses too. And I started thinking about, could I make really inexpensive bee houses that, people could put up, and then the solitary bees lay their cocoons in these little tubes in the houses, and then you can harvest them and move the cocoons around and things like that. So I started pursuing that. And luckily, a friend from way back had coffee with him, and he's like, oh, by the way, my daughter is dating a bee expert. He's getting his PhD in wild bees. Are you interested in talking to him? And my daughter too, and it's because she works with honeybees. And I said, absolutely. We had a call, and they're the two of the nicest people I know. And they delicately told me that this bee house idea was terrible, a disaster waiting to happen for a lot of reasons. But the person who is now my partner, his name is Wyatt Shell. He said to me, I've had this idea about how to motivate people to save bees by planting native plants and gamifying it. So can we work on that idea together? And I said, absolutely. And just started this super invigorating educational process on what are native plants, how can you actually turn this into a scalable business, and what are the needs out there that allow me to have this potential opportunity. So we started digging into that. Wyatt was part-time, I was full-time, and then Wyatt left his job in academia, and I was a little worried, like, can he be a good entrepreneur? And he's turned out to be an unbelievable entrepreneur. So that's where we are. We now have a third employee who recently graduated from Stanford with an MBA, and she's doing our marketing. I won't call it business development. She's doing great too. So it's the three of us right now trying to get traction.
I think it's a fascinating problem. I think it would be really cool to we hear about the bees, right? And the problem, but I don't know that myself or a lot of people fully grasp the implications of what is this problem? What are the effects it has on us? What's the history of it? And when you layer on top of that, yards, gardens, lawn care, native plants, what is the confluence of those two areas and how people's relationships to their yards, the combination of all these things that's allowed for you to embark on this My Home Park journey?
Native plants, for the definition, are plants that were here 10,000 years ago or more. They've evolved here. And as such, the native bees, beneficial insects, butterflies, and when we say pollinators, all evolve with these plants. So they use these plants for food, to reproduce on. And in turn, when they are diving into the flowers of these plants, they are now pollinating other plants. And it's how about 33% of our food is maintained, our food sources, through pollination from insects. So there's two types. If we focus on bees, there's really two types of bees. There's solitary bees, also known as wild bees, and then there's the domesticated invasive bees, which are honeybees. And the honeybees get all the attention. When people think of bees, they think of these bees that live in hives and live in colonies and have a whole society together. But the most effective bees actually come from, they're the solitary bees. And they're the ones that live in tubes. Now, these tubes can be holes in old trees. They could be in the ground. But the types of bees are known as mason bees or leaf cutter bees. What's so interesting about them is they gather pollen, they go into a hole, and they scrape the pollen off their abdomen, they lay an egg on it, and then they wall it off. And they keep doing that. So you might have 6 chambers in this. And it's amazing. They have like the females are in the back and the males are in the front. So the males can hatch first, and then they go, get stronger by getting some food, and then the females hatch and they mate, and the males are basically done with at that point, and they just repeat. These bees are really effective because they have to gather a lot of pollen to scrape and lay the egg on, because when the egg becomes a larvae and then hatches, it eats that pollen cake and then has enough strength to go on. So because they're gathering so much and they have these special abdomens that are like Velcro, they are better pollinators. They, like a drunken fraternity boy, they dive into a flower, roll around, and then dive into the next one. They're just great pollinators. Those bees can live in the hollow tubes of the stems of native plants, but mostly they go around and they just evolve with these native plants. And the more native plants you have, the better they do, the more pollinating they do. As we've developed all this land, now all of a sudden these native plants like goldenrod and Joe pieweed and wild indigo and columbine and geranium, they're harder to find. So that's part of what's going on with the bee population. There's less of their natural habitat, less food, less places for them to reproduce. Then there's also, the pesticides that people are using in their lawns that carry over. And there's something called neonicotinoids, which are chemicals used in the ag business. And then finally, there's monoculture farming, which means you could have a gigantic farm. In the old days, it was all different types of food products, all different types of crops. And, the insects, the pollinators could pick and choose. But now you have acres and acres of something like corn that doesn't need to be pollinated. And it's like a desert for the pollinators. Same thing with your lawn is a desert for the pollinators. There's no food unless you let the clover grow in, as some people do. But like a perfectly maintained lawn like you see in Shaker Heights when you drive through, it's a desert. There's no food. There's a lot of chemicals being used. And it has hurt the bee population.
So of all the ways you could attempt to positively impact the bee population, obviously you, through this discovery process, learned that maybe bee houses are not the best option. And I'd love to understand why that's the case. But why is planting native plants the top impact, highest leverage way that you can, materially affect the situation here?
Yeah. And that has to do with the name My Home Park. We are trying to get everyone to take control of the piece of the earth that they own, which is their yard, and say, okay, you can use your yard to help the pollinator population. You really, are we going to be able to stop our neighbors from using different chemicals, and pesticides? Probably not. Are we going to be able to stop monoculture ag? Probably not. Neonicotinoids? Probably not. But we do control our yard. And therefore, what is the best way to use that little slice of the earth that we own? It is to plant native plants. And, I've been looking at this problem, from a more like logical manner. What, for $100, let's say, what's the best thing that I can do for the environment? And I was, working with LED lights. Those things are amazing, right? They use about 1/10 of the electricity that traditional incandescent lighting does. So that would be the first thing I would do, is I would change out as many lights from incandescent or even fluorescent to LED. After that, I can compost. That's very helpful. But most people are just recycling, which is, me coming from Dow Chemical, I know that it is a scam perpetrated on the American public. Recycling. It's not really doing anything to the point that I even encourage my kids now not to recycle anything but glass and aluminum. But planting native plants for $100, you can plant, let's say 25 native plants, and that will actually have a big impact on the environment. And if everyone did that, it would have a huge impact on the environment. And these plants are going to grow and develop and become more and more valuable over time. So it just made sense, this idea of native plants. And by the way, they're very pretty. Some people think they're kind of messy, but that's where our designs come in, where we're going to design it for you so it looks like it belongs there. If you have a small space, we're going to keep them low. If you have a fence, we'll let them grow a little higher. But they actually are beautiful.
So what is My Home Park? How would you describe the company and the goal and the vision?
We're trying to get people to buy landscaping online. And by landscaping, it's plants. We're not selling any kind of hardscaping, or even right now, we're not selling trees or shrubs. We're selling perennials, native perennials. And we want to make it like any other home product you would buy. Okay, let's use a sofa as an example, Jeffrey. So you go online and you say, okay, I need something that's 6 to 8 feet wide, and I like these fabrics and I like these colors, and they should, you filter it down, you have all these sofas you can buy. We're trying to make buying plants for your front yard the same way. Instead of thinking like I have to design this whole plan, this whole cohesive plan, we're saying, no, look at your front yard like your living room and drop a sofa in and see how it looks and live with it for a while, and then add a couple of chairs over here and a table. We're looking at modular landscaping. We're designing these products just like you design a sofa. You want, the way people are doing it right now, it would be the equivalent if you're buying a sofa saying, okay, I'm going to go to this store and buy the fabric. I'm going to go to this store and buy the spring. I'm going to go to this store and buy the cushion. And then I'm going to go somewhere else and buy the wood. When you go to a nursery, like you're lost, right? Well, I don't know how things fit together, and someone's asking me to buy all these different components. We're saying here's a cohesive garden that's going to look like this. We're going to give you a planting map. We're going to ship these plants to you because we're shipping little plugs that are safe to ship. And we're going to, you're going to drop it in. We're going to give you maintenance tips. We're here if you have any questions. But we are beautifying your yard. And, the back door for us is like, okay, now we've got native plants in someone's yard. And, whether they care or not, it's going to help the pollinators, the bees, the butterflies, the birds, the beneficial insects. So we're pre-designing all these native gardens. You tell us your size and your colors, and do you have a lot of sun or all shade? And we're going to give you a choice. We'll ship it right to your door.
One of the things that I think really resonated there is the degree to which, I don't even know if I can call myself an amateur, gardener, as someone who was just really unfamiliar with it, how overwhelming it can feel when you go to the stores where you would go to attempt to purchase all the things that you need to piece together to lay the right foundation to care for your yard. Could you delve into the ways that you're trying to, because you're simultaneously trying to educate and sell,
yes,
I imagine, and how you go about that? And typically are people, as prospective customers, coming to you already inclined to purchase something like this? Or is it more about trying to convince people of the efficacy and the value that this brings to the table?
I think our goal would be to sell to someone like you, Jeffrey, right? You're a homeowner. You're, first home, I would imagine, and you have enough knowledge about landscaping to do the very basic stuff. Maybe growing up, you may have cut the grass, but most likely your family had someone come in and
I'll
do
tell
that,
you,
right?
Growing up in New York, when I moved here, I called it grass trimming. I didn't even know it was mowing the lawn, So it was very new for me.
So yeah, like if we can convince you to do this, and we've really made it, we've got to the mainstream, and that's where we want to get to. But to answer the first part of that question, yeah, we're really appealing to people who know a little bit about native plants and want to make decisions and allocate resources partially for the beauty of it and partially for the impact it has on the pollinator population. We definitely, that there's a term called crossing the chasm when it comes to new products. And you have your early adopters, and most products never cross that chasm to appeal to the mass market. So how are we going to do that? You usually need an anchor point, something that one application that gets people really interested in, in your product that is fairly simple. And people in this industry are growers and ag people, and they're overthinking it. And I've always find opportunity, when you're in an industry where there are a lot of experts. So I went through this process of learning about native plants, and it really agitated me. It was so hard because how do you find out about native plants? Well, you can go to the nursery and they'll show you little pots and say, oh yeah, do this and do this and do that. Well, then you have to wait a year to see how it grows in, and it almost always will not be coordinated for you. So then you could, to help yourself out, you could, learn about these native plants. How high will it get? What conditions? What kind of soil will it thrive in? And all you have out there are these PDF charts that you have to cross-reference. And I was keeping track of my hours just to design a little plot of land here at my house. And I had like 52 hours invested in just picking out, it was like 60 square feet. And no one is going to do that, right? So that was when I went into this, and Wyatt has all this knowledge about native plants. It's very intuitive for him. And I had to keep saying to him, like, we're appealing to me, we're not appealing to you in this, right? We're going to cut my 52 hours to nothing. And how are we going to do that? And, it's really like, how much do you need to know about these plants when, to really enjoy it? I mean, I think it was from Tommy Boy, where his dad would say, like, look, I could stick my head up the butt of a cow, or I could take the butcher's word for it, right? I mean, we just want to be the butcher who tells you which is the best cut of meat. And you don't need to know what that thing ate and where it came from and how it was transported and how it was slaughtered or anything like that, right? So how do we cut it down? And what's a common feature that everyone wants? Everyone wants pretty flowers. So we started, if you go on our website, we're showing you pretty gardens, and that's all you need to know. If you want to dig deeper, you can keep going deeper. All the detail you want about these plants, about these combinations are there. But the fact is, native plants work well in communities, and we figured out, what those communities are, and we go for, as well as the two of us are able to create good-looking gardens. We try to match the colors and get a theme, and we've done all that homework for you, and it just makes it easier for the average person to say yes to the product.
Yeah, that also resonates a lot. I think particularly from, even a product management perspective, the job is always, to accomplish a task for someone and not for that person to become an expert in whatever it is that you've built. And so when a tool is introduced into a workflow, there are like only so many walls typically that people are willing to put up with before they submit. It isn't improving, their productivity, and they bail on the whole exercise. Most people don't really care about the technology, which I say in air quotes, but does it help you solve the problem?
And we have nice conversations with people about specific plants, but the best conversations are the ones who, people who just heard about native plants but have no idea where to start. And we're developing some good relationships, and we need to, as you said, we need to go even, we need to reach people who don't even know about native plants, and maybe know about the damage that lawns do on the environment, but we don't, we want to be to that mass level, and I'm seeing signs we're getting there.
When you think about empowering people to use their yards to effectively restore the environment, how And you mentioned crossing the chasm. How do you do this at scale? Both in reach and in impact. How are you thinking about how to grow this business to the level that you intend to, and what does it look like if you achieve that scale?
Yeah, like the event we were at last night, right, with all these other tech entrepreneurs. Two people asked me, like, how are you attracting customers? And my answer is always, I have no idea. We are throwing content out there. We're spending $1,000, on a good week on Google Ads, but we're getting many more people who are finding us organically. And, the first thing is content. Content has the best value. If you can make things simple for people and make them interesting and fun, that just, it gains momentum over time. So we're doing it, but we're still reaching so few people. So yeah, how can we get this out? And I feel like our best asset are these the early adopters, Jeffrey, who are super motivated by it. Okay, so what's truly our advantage? Buying Google ads or Facebook ads or even Nextdoor, Reddit is ultimately a losing game, right? The economics are going to shift. If you're getting more value out of it, then your competitors are going to get there, and then they're going to also, the supplier will charge more. So we know that's not a way to go. And it's just, you don't want to be dependent on that. That's not a good way to have a business. On the flip side, our customers who are really into restoring the environment and the habitats for pollinators are motivated to get their neighbor to do the same, right? If you bought a car that you like, let's say you bought the new Ford Bronco, and you liked it, right? You were driving around with the top down. You'll tell people you really like it, but you're not going to be motivated to get your neighbor to buy it. You don't care. You don't get anything out of it. But if your neighbor puts in a native garden, then, okay, all of a sudden you're building a little pathway for pollinators that can draw more to you and extend the habitat. So I think, as I look at this business, how can you scale? If we can make it interesting for those people to help spread the word, then I feel like we're onto something. So that to me is the opportunity. It's like it is using your customer base to tell your story and make it fun or rewarding for them. What do you think of that?
I like it. I like it a lot. I'm sold. I'm ready to do this. One of the other things I had always thought, especially not having a lawn in my life growing up, was that mowing a lawn to me always felt like potentially the biggest waste of human energy of anything that we do as people. Right. that we spend this time constantly going through the motions of doing that for no particularly good reason. Just seemed fishy off the bat. No, so this is exciting. I think you've sold me as a prospective customer.
So I need to do more podcasts, is what you're saying. So one by one, I could get podcast hosts.
Exactly. I'll ask one more question here, and then we can kind of turn more to some higher level reflections and discussions. But all things considered, for what you're doing at My Home Park, what does success mean? How do you know you'll have been successful?
Great question. It's different than before my last venture. My last venture, I needed to prove to myself, to everyone around me, that I could be a successful entrepreneur. And, we'd go out to dinner and someone would say to, like, my wife, like, do you realize what he's done? He's built a company from zero to 10 million, 15, 20, whatever it was at the time, on a tiny bit of capital and equity. And my wife would always say, yeah, it's great. But I know that, part of what she was thinking is, like, when are we going to see some money off of this? When are we going to see an exit off of this? And for so long, I felt like I was moderately successful, but had never, without the exit. And, there are plenty of people who are running ongoing businesses that are super successful. They're employing people, they're growing leaders, they're, having an impact, they're making good products. So that is a great part of success also. Our culture, and, for someone's security, the exit is also really important. So, luckily for this one, I don't feel like I have to prove that. I don't, it's not in it for the financial gain. It is for the impact is how many square yards can we convert to native plants that were not native plants before, and how big an impact can that have? So that'll be the measurement. And at the same time, the younger people who are with me, I want them to learn the entrepreneurial process, do it, then go off and do it on their own also. I want to educate people. It's fun to talk about, and it really is interesting. And I feel like I can explain it to people in a few sentences, whereas no one was able to do that for me at the time. So I want to be able to educate people also on the importance of native plants. And it would be nice to, profit will actually allow us to scale more. So I always have this conversation with our growers. Like I say to them, because they're not business people, right? They just grow beautiful plants, and they like them, they gather seeds, and they want them to be very pure and, local eco type. I say to them, look, I don't need to make money off of this right now. I just need to prove out our concept. Eventually I'll come to you and say, like, we got to tighten this up because we need to make money. But for now, we want to prove the concept. And I think we are right now. We haven't talked about our success, but we're basically running at 3x where we thought our sales were this year so far. And people are finding us, and their average sale is over $200. And, that people are buying $200 of native plants from a company they never heard of, when they've never bought plants online before, and they've probably never worked with native plants. We're seeing a lot of good signs for this. So the question is, we're going to have to balance investors. The investors know this is a mission-based company, so they're not going to be driving for profits as much, but they're still going to want to see profits. So the question is, how do we operate this business in an intelligent manner that allows us to have free cash flow so we can expand into other states? So the success is how many native plants can we get in the ground that wouldn't have been put in the ground before?
Were there any particularly painful mistakes that you experienced at Wireless Environment that the second time around you are explicitly trying to avoid with My Home Park?
I'll tell you a better example is the company I had before, which was called Toolivation. And we started that in 2000. And the brief story is I met my wife in Baltimore. She was from here. And her uncle was asking me, hey, I need a head of sales and marketing for my internet term life insurance company. And this was late 99. We had just gotten married, loved Baltimore, lived like on the harbor. We'd wake up and we'd see these big ships coming in, and it was really nice. We had a really nice time there. And I said, I don't want to move. I don't want to live in Cleveland. I'm like you, I'm an East Coast person. And I wasn't interested, but they kept working me. And I finally moved here, and pretty much that company imploded, due to the .com bubble. It imploded like the first week I was there. So I had to find a new job. I was introduced to John Nottingham and John Spirk of Nottingham Spirk, and they liked my background. They had just launched the spin brush toothbrush. So they said, can we do a similar thing with power tools? Because I had come from Black & Decker DeWalt. And I thought this was the greatest idea. And we did it. And it was a really good idea they had. So along the way, we built this business, and we had a deal with True Value where they said, okay, if you fund this, we're going to rebate. It's a Christmas thing. Everyone can buy it, and then they can send in for rebate and get it for free. They said your rebate, figure about 20% rebate rate. So we increased our price 20% to cover it. And we wound up having like a 72% rebate rate. So it pretty much put the company under because we had to cover that rebate. And it made me think, like, who you choose as your customers is really important for a small business. You want a customer that needs you, not that uses you as a promotional tool and doesn't care about you at all. Because we were selling to Walgreens. We had a similar, relationship with them. Everyone was using us. They didn't care about us. So when we started Mr. Beams, I said, I'm not going after these big retailers. I'm going after catalogs and little e-tailers that, we'd actually be important to and would think we can be a big business. So we did that. We launched in 2008 our first product and built that up. And in 2011, Amazon came knocking. They weren't really into lighting, and they said, you want to start selling through us? And we said, we'll give it a shot. And it just turned out to be an amazing partnership with Amazon, because we were a really high feature and value type of product that people wouldn't know about except for through Amazon. And that we were their poster child for a while. And it just showed me, who you choose as your customer and how much balance you have in that relationship is really important. So for now, are we using that for My Home Park? We're going after individuals, so it's not really relevant. But on the backside with the growers, are we significant to a grower? If we're not, we're going to get pushed around. We're going to get the last of the inventory, and we're going to be the first one who is told, sorry, we're out. You can't buy this from us. So these, there's Michael Porter's 5 forces, which always said, of all the forces on your business, who's got the power, who's got the leverage. And that is a hugely important issue. Anywhere you don't have leverage, there's a good chance it's going to be used against you. So I'm much more aware of that now.
Well, one of the things that we were talking about yesterday that I think we can unpack a bit more here is, and I'll frame it slightly differently than we were talking about it, because I think it's interesting when we're talking about mediocrity, which we'll put out there for a moment, to think about it also in contrast to excellence, right? And how it is that you're thinking about cultivating a higher bar for ambition and quality in the context of, where we are here in Northeast Ohio, in what maybe, you could describe as a latent complacency or tolerance for mediocrity in some regards.
So I'm not letting you off easy on this, by the way, Jeffrey. I'm going to ask you your observations from, being an outsider also. But yeah, I think when I first moved here, I was surprised at some of the work that was considered acceptable. And I'd say in like a few categories of service providers, it was advertising agencies, it was public relations, accounting, legal. And I mentioned we work with Jones Day. Amazing. There's some amazing legal minds in this town. And then there's also some very average in all these categories of service providers. And it just, when I would stand up and say, that's not good enough, I always, and I still get, it's usually like, oh, no one's ever said that to us. It's something like that. Or what do you mean? It's a lot of surprise. And I realized over time, like there's a culture here of acceptance of mediocrity. And it's almost, there's partially the reason people move here is because things are a little bit easier. They're not as competitive. They're a little more laid back. And I've grown to enjoy that. I also have grown to enjoy the people. I feel like of anywhere I've lived in the country, like the people here are the best mix of sophistication, laid back, kindness, sincerity. This is like the epicenter where, that the Venn diagram where all those things meet here. So I so appreciate that. But what drives me crazy is that there is an acceptance of, average service, of average performance. And I think we need to start using that term much more often. And that term as I was thinking about this, that term is, that's not good enough. And I tell people there are 3 groups of life that you interact with that you don't want to make excuses for. Number 1, your kids. Okay, you don't want to just say, well, yeah, but he or she, right? But he or she didn't get a lot of sleep last night, or things like that. You start making excuses for your kids, and they start living up to those excuses. Employees, same way, right? Like if it's something that you would have done, but I can't expect them to do it. They've got they've got this going on in their life, or they're not an owner. And then the third thing are your dogs. Like, you make excuses for your dogs, and then they're running all over you. But I think we have a tendency here.
I see that one a lot.
We have a tendency to make excuses, and instead of saying that's not good enough. And I just, I feel it here. Like, I've been living here since 2000, so 23 years. And when people say, "Do you like it here?" I say, I'm starting to get used to it. And then I really like it here, but I can't get used to the acceptance of just average, quality, the food, or some of these restaurants around here that people consider really, really good and frequent all the time. I mean, I just can't believe that this is, and there's a group of people here who are just too insulated. They're not traveling to Seattle. They're not going to Austin. They're not going down to Miami, frequently enough. And they're not experiencing what's going on. Boston, a city I've spent a lot of time in, basically built a city bigger than Cleveland in the last 10 years in the Seaport area. I don't know if you've been there, but it's amazing. And there's all kinds of, business going on, and the amount of businesses that come out of those universities. And then you look at a university like Case Western, and it's like, why? There's so many smart people there, and there's so much good going on. Why are we not getting companies and innovators out of that? I don't quite understand it. I just know that there's a cloud of this here, and it drives me crazy. And I throw it at you, Jeffrey. What do you notice?
There's a Paul Graham article that I've revisited recently. I think it's called The Anatomy of Determination, but he talks about ambition a lot in this. And essentially what I took away from it is that it's kind of that old aphorism that, you are a combination of those you surround yourself with. And then I think pulling on what you talked about with kind of the insulation, I also feel pretty strongly that travel is somewhat, the enemy of bias and prejudice that you might have, because it expands perspective and shows you what else is out there. And to me, I think coming from a city like New York, where, to a degree, average and mediocrity as you've described it is kind of squashed, right? Because from think about restaurants, like only the best restaurants are going to survive, because the rest just don't make it over time. And I think fortunately, like, you can elevate ambition, and there's a lot you can do to increase it. But I don't, my sense is like people just haven't seen enough ambition here. And coming from a place where it's really celebrated as kind of a core cultural tenet, I think that might be part of the challenge. But I do know is that when you take people who, and I think it's kind of part and parcel to entrepreneurship, but when you take people who are ambitious and trying to build things and put them together, it does bring out that in themselves and everyone around them.
Yeah. Well, I listened to a number of your podcasts before, we decided to do this, and there's some great stories on the metro parks. Like, what a ambitious entrepreneurial, organization that is, and how amazing. And that's world class. And those are the things that I get really inspired by and would love to exchange ideas with. Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. But when I came here, I was surprised at how many people worked in like a family business, or were using the connections of their forefathers, let's say, or is that the right term? The people who preceded them, and they came back here to use those connections and use that work that someone else did. Whereas, in other cities, I just think there's people who are trying to make it on their own. In fact, you just can't come back and count on that. So it's partially self-selecting. People who want to be comfortable wind up here, and that makes for a really nice lifestyle. But we are now, I think we're a fourth tier city. I don't think we're even a third tier city. When I look at cities, I think there's no city like New York or LA, right? And then you have your Austins, Miamis, Chicagos are second tier. And then your third tier are, not Cleveland anymore. Maybe Columbus has moved up to third tier, and now we're in this fourth tier, and we have to accept that. Like, why are we here, and how are we gonna, get things rolling again? And are people really just okay with where we are right now? I don't know. I get disappointed in that, and then I spend more time with people, and I'm like, well, they're such great people here, but can you have both? I think you can. I don't think that one excludes the other. I think we can have a nice place to live, but with more ambition and like people saying that's not good enough more often, and making people fulfill their promise instead of making excuses for people.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to that, and I think in a lot of ways that, from my perspective, is kind of the purpose of the podcast, right? It was to try and celebrate the people and encourage the people who are trying to raise the bar, because that was, to me, one of the starkest differences between, if you're out in San Francisco, it's just celebrated when you try, and whether or not you're succeeding, it's, are you trying to raise the bar? That's the whole ethos of it, and that is celebrated. And I think we have to do more of that celebration.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. That they say they celebrate failure, and which is always an odd concept to me. Like, but here it's held against you, the failure. I think it's neutral maybe out there, but as far as raising the bar, that's a really good point. Like, even if you fail, but you made an incremental improvement in something, it's looked at differently there. And here, I don't know that anyone would ever give people credit for that. And I don't know that that's the mindset here as much. So it's a good point.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd love to have like a bigger conversation about this and what the roots are. We went, again, this event we went to last night, which was a mixer for tech entrepreneurs. I was hoping to meet some young people that were like of a whole different mindset than I'm used to. And I bumped into you and Patrick right away, and I'm like, oh, great, the young people and doing stuff, and kind of ended there. I didn't really see anyone of the other people looked like me. So I don't know. I don't know what is going to do it. I have this fantasy that, like in Ohio City, where you are, and in that whole West Side area, there's this group of creators and innovators that I just don't see because I don't get out much anymore. I hope that's the case, but are you coming across those groups?
I think they're there. I think you have to actively seek them out. But I do think that there are a lot of people building really cool stuff here. And I do feel, and again, this was the whole impetus for the podcast, is that most people are not aware of the people who are building things, right? Whether that's, and not even entrepreneurship, it could be art, could be, whatever it is, but who are trying to create. I think it's there.
Well, thanks for pulling all these people together, because it's a whole library now of, ideas and inspiration. And, it's great to learn from someone else's success and especially from their failures, because you're less likely to repeat it.
Well, thank you. Well, we can bookend our conversation here. I have one more question, and then our traditional closing question, which is pretty easy. But I'll put out there, if there's anything not obvious that we haven't talked about that you think is important, across any of your endeavors or learnings that you would like to highlight.
Yeah, I think having your own board, both business and personal, has been essential for my success. And even though I had a good background, I went to Harvard Business School, and a lot of times you come out, you think you know everything, but quite the opposite. Like I've taken on and I've learned that I don't need to know everything. I need to know the people who know specific things and are really good at knowing things. And surrounding myself with those people has been essential for my success personally, advice with kids, relationships, and business also. So when I see a young, entrepreneur business person, and they're trying hard to make it look like they know more than they do or know everything, I always want to remind people, like, just know the person who you can go to get that answer is really important. And then these groups, like I'm in a Visage group that has some incredibly successful people. In fact, like out of 18 when I joined, I'd say I was like the least intelligent, least successful person. Everyone should be part of a group like that. And, it will change your life. And the thing that my Visage leader has taught me is the quality of your life improves with the quality of your questions. And it's proven to be really true. I think it's just a very simple idea. Ask better questions, and it just opens you up for, a broader experience and bigger thinking, bigger opportunities.
Well, we'll close it out here with our traditional closing question, which is tied to Cleveland and is for a hidden gem, for something that other folks may not know about. But, but perhaps they should.
I knew you were going to ask. You were going to ask this. And
it's the only surefire question.
Yeah. Hidden gem. I think so many people say the metro parks. We live in Chagrin Falls. We use the metro parks like nonstop, and there's different parts of it. Oh, I'll tell you what the hidden gem is fly fishing for steelhead on the Chagrin River. It is insane. Like, it's world class, and it's so accessible, and it's so beautiful, and it connects you with nature in such a way. But these fish they're phenomenal. They're monsters. They take a lot of experience, skill. It takes a lot of time, but it's so rewarding. And the fact, like, you can, from my house, I can actually walk to the river, be in the river, fish for, lunch hour, and then come out. And I rarely catch anything, I have to admit to you. So, but I don't care. Like, it is just so resetting and inspiring. And you're out there. I could go like some days 3 hours and not see a person and just walk up the river. It's spectacular.
That is spectacular. Well, David, this was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. I really enjoyed talking to you and exploring some of these issues. You pulled out a lot of things that I haven't always, or even, verbalized, but it's really, it's, I hope it can help some people. And if not, I'll play it for my kids and get them to criticize me about it. So we'll have some impact one way or another for me. But thank you so much.
That's good to hear. If people had anything they wanted to follow up with you about to criticize you or celebrate this, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, David at my home park.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.